Hey, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give a minute to let people in from the waiting room. So thanks for joining us today. We get going here. It takes a minute for everyone to get on and log in. So we'll just give one brief minute. And hopefully the chat is enabled for you to leave in comments and questions as we get going. If not, for sure, the Q&A feature should be as well. Okay, yeah. So good day, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. Really excited to continue on with our professional development webinar series that the Indigenous Women's Leadership Network offers. And I've been thrilled to have served as kind of the coordinator and program manager for IWLN. I'm having a little transition, so I'm really excited to introduce the individual who's going to be taking over as the program coordinator. Talia Bear has been the Indigenous Peoples Engagement Manager with Western Resource Advocates. She's working over there for the past few years. Originally from Arizona, she's an enrolled member of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation and is also Dene. So let's give a warm welcome to Talia, and I'll let her just have a couple minutes here to talk more about her transition in the role and who she is. So Talia, I'll pass it to you for a minute.
Thank you, Heather. Hi, everyone. So glad you're joining us today. Like Heather said, my name is Talia Bear. I'm super excited to be helping out with the Indigenous Women's Leadership Network and taking it over along with Mira Barney, who will be assisting from Western Resource Advocates as well. Super excited to get to know everyone and to learn from the network in how we can provide leadership opportunities and networking opportunities to the group. Like Heather said, I am enrolled in the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation. I'm also half Navajo. I originally came from Arizona, but I've been living in Colorado for about the last 20 years, working for Western Resource Advocates, where I work not only in the water sector, but also in the lands and clean energy areas. I'm going to pop my email into the chat here in a little bit. So if there's any questions or any way that you want to communicate with me about IWLN, feel free to reach out. So with that, thank you so much. And I'm excited to learn from this webinar.
So glad to have Talia on board. So again, IWLN.org is our website. You can go there where we'll post the recording for this afterwards and have the recordings of our other prior webinar series as well. But moving on, really excited that today we have Elizabeth Homer here with us to talk about conflict resolution and management and all these challenges that we face in the workplace or even in our communities and trying to advocate on policy issues or whatever it might be. Elizabeth is a member of the Osage Nation of Oklahoma and has served as vice chair of the National Indian Gaming Commission. She now directs Homer Law, a law practice that primarily focuses on the field of Indian law. So really a wealth of experience on tribal, state, federal actions. Prior to being on the National Indian Gaming Commission, she worked with Interior Department's Director of Office of American Indian Trust. She also has been with the Office of the District Attorney for the 2nd Judicial District of New Mexico, where she prosecuted violent felony offenses before the criminal division. I mean, you really could go on and on about Elizabeth's experience. And so really thrilled to pass the time over to her and that we can learn from her. Again, feel free to put in comments, questions as we're going through. One of the great things about these webinars is that we tend to be a smaller group. So this should be, please feel like this is a safe place to address some of the challenges that you may be facing and get some really great expertise advice from Liz. So yay, thanks, Liz. Turn it over to you.
Well, I thank you so much, Heather, and congratulations, Talia, for assuming the leadership of this leadership forum. It's very exciting. I'm very happy and honored to have been invited to be with you today to talk about, a subject that we all that we all experience and have occasion to really focus on every once in a while, because if we don't, it makes it really hard to enjoy our lives, because conflict can be a very destructive force in our lives, but it can also be a very healthy one. I mean, I don't advocate rolling over. I'm a lawyer. I've been a prosecutor. I now negotiate contracts, and you know, I have had to confront issues of conflict my entire career. And I like to say that there's one principle that we all need to accept when we start talking about conflict. And it's really an interesting subject to us, because it's a subject we probably know best, but think about the least, and that is your own self, right? So to talk about conflict management and to talk about conflict resolution requires us to know ourselves. So that's the number one rule: know yourself. Now, I think the most important skill that we have in our efforts to live in a perfectly conflict managed life is whether or not I'm a good communicator. Do I express myself clearly? You know, without nuance. Do I tell it like it is, or do I get defensive, or do I send out some kind of, negative vibe, or, how clear am I when I communicate with others? The next thing that I think becomes really important is, am I a respectful person? Disrespect in and of itself is a conflict escalator. We all know how to push other people's buttons. I don't know if we think about it or if we innately do it, but we know how to do it. And one surefire method to escalate a conflict is to be disrespectful to other people. And like a lot of these things kind of fall into that category. Do I listen to people without interrupting them? Do I stay in control of myself in tense situations? One of my little lifelong habits that I have had to manage, so that I am, least likely to escalate a conflict unintentionally, are facial expressions. I am a terrible eye roller, like, I'll roll my eyes. That is a very, that can be a trigger for other people. That can trigger them to being angry or push back at you to escalate a conflict. So do I stay in control of things like that? Am I being respectful? Is my voice calm? Or does it have that little hateful edge to it? Am I gritting my teeth talking to other people? I need to stay calm. I need to stay in control. And then the next one, and that's going to require a little bit more reflection. Do I feel confident in my knowledge and my skills and my competence level? Right? Because what makes us feel defensive is if we're uncomfortable. If this is a subject matter that's not really my cup of tea, or I don't really understand, or I'm in an environment where I feel defensive, my own level of confidence is critically important in my ability to communicate, right? And my ability to communicate gives me an edge on being able to manage conflict in my life. And then here's the flip side of that, and something just as important. Can I stand up for myself and my ideas without belittling the ideas of others, right? So again, it's a self-control kind of issue. Now, you might be going, all she's doing is talking about self-reflection and, one's own self. Well, that's because, something that, seems really trite and we've heard it all our lives happens to be really true. And that is that the only person we have any control over is ourself. That's the bottom line. Now, long years ago, I was working for the DA's office in Albuquerque. And, our district attorney used to have little staff professionalism. Every Wednesday, we'd have the Wednesday brown bag, and he would bring in somebody to talk to us. And as you can imagine, being a prosecutor is a life that is filled with conflict, right? It's a life that involves a lot of conflict. And so the important thing is, according to our boss, is that we understand conflict. We understand our own role in conflict. And over the course of my life, I've gone to many speeches and leadership courses and programs and educational series. But the one I remember the most was this one at the DA's office. The guy comes in and he said, every day in every interaction with another human being, whether it's your husband or your wife, or whether it's your boss or your colleagues, or just strangers at the grocery store, we make a decision when there is some kind of conflict. And we decide one of two things. We're conflict escalators. So our behavior, our conduct, our intention is to escalate the conflict, or are we de-escalators? Are we managing the conflict and hopefully at some stage, perhaps even resolving the conflict, right? And I had never thought of that before. I was always outward focused. Oh, so-and-so, they're really hateful. They're always trying to, cause a fuss or put down people's ideas, or, I was focused externally. And this was the first time that somebody started talking and say, no, focus internally. What am I doing? What pushes my buttons? What kind of communicator am I? Because I am the only one that has control over that, or whether I'm a conflict escalator or a conflict de-escalator, right? And in a professional environment like we're all working in, we have to be professionals. We have to develop a set of skills, that advance our professions, that, are professional, that are appropriate in a professional environment. I remember I did have a colleague in my past that was like a completely out of control person. They had no self-control. They go in their office and throw things around. You'd hear like books falling on the walls or flying against the walls or things like that. That is very unprofessional conduct. And as you can imagine, people that engage in highly unprofessional conduct are very often unsuccessful. Unsuccessful on many different levels. Unsuccessful in advancing your agenda. Unsuccessful in building and having meaningful professional relationships, or personal relationships for that matter, right? So professionalism requires us to reflect upon ourselves and what kind of person am I? What am I doing? How do I manage? Because the better you are at managing conflict, controlling your own, at least being aware of your own behaviors and how your own behaviors are affecting others around you, that will make you a more successful person. That will make you a more skilled person and a more effective professional. So think about it. What kind of person am I? Do I stop participating in discussions when things heat up? I'm not listening. I'm not participating. I'm just mad. Okay. Do I seethe angrily inside when somebody offends me? Do I just get bull up and seize up and just lose control of my emotions? Do I explode in anger? Do I try to dominate other people by interrupting them or talking over them or belittling them? Do I allow, on the other hand, and look at the flip side of this, on the other hand, do I allow other people to dominate me? Do I apologize every time I'm challenged? Well, I'm sorry, but, I have another idea. I'm sorry, but, why am I apologizing for having an idea? Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Isn't that what I'm paid for? Isn't that my job? Do I criticize or blame or attack others whenever I feel defensive? Am I rude? Am I loud? Am I abrasive? Well, if I am, I need polishing. I need to be polished a little bit more. I need to become a professional and engage in relationships professionally. So, as I'm saying, in order to do that, I really need to know myself. What kind of person am I? Am I a passive communicator? I mean, there's basically 4 communication styles. Where do I fit in? Am I passive? Well, listen to this, friends. The passive communicator is one who doesn't actually communicate. Now, that's a tip off right there that it's not the most effective, communication style, because you're not actually communicating. This is the person who comes to the meeting, who sits quietly and speaks only when pressed, and may thereafter express apologies for what he or she said. This is also the person who often fails to stand up for themselves or their ideas or, their project or their plan. Not the most effective communication style. Well, then there's the passive aggressive person. I think personally that the passive aggressive style of communication is probably the worst quality of all of the communication styles. This is the person who puts on a smile and then wears a friendly face, but who takes a jab at each idea that another person throws into the mix, who makes jokes at the expense of others and then goes, oh, I was just kidding. Yeah, can't you take a joke? It's okay. Your little idea was cute, but, I don't know if it really works. That is the kind of person who is a sabotager. They sabotage success. They sabotage progress. They sabotage your happiness, right? Because don't we all deserve at least to be comfortable in our work, comfortable in our homes, comfortable in our communities? The passive aggressive communicator is the one who wrecks that for us, right? We need to know it and be able to call it out when we see it, and sometimes when you're trying to work as a team and you've got a passive aggressive communicator, the one that's always throwing rocks or sandbagging ideas, you need to be able to call that out. And sometimes you need to have checks against that, like a communications protocol, for example. Well, we're going to have a meeting. Here's the ground rules, and have ground rules so that you can put a check on these undesirable, passive aggressive behaviors. Well, then the next communication style is the assertive one, right? The assertive communicator is able to express his or her thoughts, interests, and ideas strongly, even forcefully, but in a manner that shows respect for the thoughts, interests, and ideas of others. An assertive person is able to stand up for his or her own rights while maintaining a sensitivity to the rights of everybody else in the group or on the team or in the community. And then finally, there's the aggressive communicator. The aggressive communicator is out to win, okay, and not particularly concerned with the ideas, interests, and ideas or feelings of others. He or she is direct and may display intimidating behaviors such as speaking loudly, shouting, belittling, and interrupting. I hate interruption. You know, that's like one of my pet peeves. And it actually can evoke a strong reaction from me, you know, but I've tried to shape myself professionally over the years so that I can point that out and, you know, and call it out, but without being, you know, belittling about it, without trying to hurt the other person's feelings. You know, the other thing about conflict is that relationships make a difference. You know, if I have, say in my job, I work in this office, and every once in a while, our office interacts with this office over here. And that, you know, there might even be a little rivalry between our offices. You know, little rivalries can turn into wars if left to the devices of poor communicators or people that have, you know, that don't understand the communications styles that are professional, that you use in a professional environment. So we want to have good relationships with the people that we work with. So we need to be communicating with them. You know, in an ideal world, we're going to have positive relationships. We're going to be receptive to one another. If needed, we'll have a protocol that will establish our ground rules for our interactions and our communications. And this is really important. And this is something that we all have to work with because it's easy to overlook the interests of others, right? It's easy to just want to get our way. We want to win, right? We want to get our way. We want, you know, and we're not thoughtful and we're not considerate and we're not able to really understand the other person's position. And when we're like that, when it comes to conflict management, we are crippled. We are crippled because I cannot begin to resolve a conflict if I don't understand where that other person or office or entity is coming from, right? I'm like blind. My eyes are covered. You know, I can't see the way because I don't know. What is it that they need? What is it that they want? Is it something legal? Is it a style or a policy? Or what is it about this issue that affects that other person or that other party? Now, somebody just added a question about ground rules. What are good ground rules to have? Well, when we're interacting with other people, you know, the basic ground rule is one, we're respectful. Okay. I used to have a rule when we were doing, you know, negotiated rulemaking, for example. I have a rule that nobody could criticize somebody else's idea unless they had a substitute idea. right? So you're not going to let that passive aggressive back and shoot down ideas, and then you don't get anywhere because all you've done is, live through people shooting down ideas. You haven't come up with a plan or a strategy or the right language to use or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish here. One ground rule is that you are not allowed to belittle the ideas of others, right? Another is that you're not allowed to interrupt. And, if you have to have a talking stick, which is actually a very brilliant thing that the tribes used to have, in council long years ago, if you have to have it as long as somebody has the talking stick, or maybe in our day and time, it's the microphone, you don't interrupt them, right? You listen to what they're saying. So then that's kind of the next ground rules. Listen to what's being said to you. Listen very carefully and listen analytically. Okay, why are they saying that? What's their interest? What are they trying to articulate here? And then you can start thinking, well, how can I accommodate that interest without sacrificing my interest? So those are really important ground rules. Respect, listening, no interrupting. You're going to be able to have a much better meeting with just those 3 rules in place. And there's other rules that you can come up with as you go that kind of meet the personalities that are at the table. Do we have 2 aggressive people, 1 assertive person, and 2 passive, and a passive aggressive person on the team? Okay, we can kind of figure that out, and then we can put checks on those communications deficiencies. Let's see. Oh, here's a great follow-up. Interruption is often something folks with ADHD do. How would you recommend sharing that information with other coworkers? That is something, and you're not trying to intentionally be rude. I recognize that this action often upsets folks, but don't catch myself until after the fact. Actively working on it, but we all slip. We're trying to be more inclusive to neurodivergent folks, but this seems to be very new in our field. And I think that that's true. I mean, part of that goes to understanding the other person, right? It's like, where's this person coming from? But I will tell you that, we all have things in our personalities that we can work on. None of us are perfect people. We all are going to slip up from time to time, but being honest about it, and saying, I think that, and following up with colleagues after a meeting, for example, where, things have kind of gone off the rails, and saying, I thought I should have handled that differently, or I wish I had been more attentive to what you were saying. I think right now I'm hearing it better than I did at the meeting, and just being very forthcoming about those things. That's why I say understanding yourself. You start there. Number 1 rule, know yourself and be that check on yourself, and if required, get coaching, get professional development, hopefully, you're working for an organization or an entity that recognizes that we're not all born polished and professional, and that professionalism is a skill that is to be acquired. We're not just born with it. I've spent my whole life, getting polished up. That little girl from Hominy, Oklahoma, who wasn't really very considerate or thoughtful about other people. It took a lot of years of personal reflection and personal growth to kind of, start getting the polish. If I do have something that is inherent, I really want to let people know, but I also want to find accommodations within myself too. Acknowledge it, recognize it, and see what you can do with it, and then be honest about it. Now, I was talking about the difference that relationships make. and it kind of goes along with what we were just talking about, when we have a relationship and people get to know us, and know our foibles and actually start to like maybe even care about us a little bit, which is always a good thing to have and to be able to do. We can have a positive history of communication. And that's really all we're trying to get to, is making sure that we're able to communicate effectively, regardless of our little foibles, regardless of our histories, our backgrounds, to just learn to be good professionals. And we can all do that. In that ideal world where we're like that, we have this positive history, we understand each other and each other's interests, and then we can communicate business as usual. It's not every interaction is like, wow, we have to approach it like we're going around, tiptoeing around in order not to escalate a conflict. We should be able to just communicate in a business as usual sort of way. Now, where we're in a destructive environment, this is where we have no or limited contact with the other party. It's like, I don't like them, they don't like me, we stay apart as much as we can, because that's going to produce anger and acrimony. Anger and acrimony are stressors. They cause our blood pressure to go up. They cause us to be unhappy. They cause us to be anxious. These are not good, healthy emotions, right? And so when we're in a destructive situation, I don't mean just destructive in kind of this abstract way. I mean, literally destructive to your health, destructive to your ability to get things done and to advance, destructive of your personal well-being and the well-being of your institution, right? So just these destructive situations, they exist where we don't have any protocol. We don't even think or care about the other party's issues or concerns. I could not care less. I care zero for what so-and-so thinks. First of all, that's unprofessional. 2, it's childish. And 3, it will thwart your ability to advance your cause, right? So we want to polish ourselves out of those kinds of attitudes, and be healthy, have healthy relationships. The other thing that this destructive situation leads to, where we don't care, we don't have rules, everyone's always mad all the time. We have this negative history of interaction. Things don't happen except in a crisis, right? Very seldom does anything good come out of crisis, especially institutionally and organizationally. Usually when something boils over into a crisis, somebody's head is going to roll, right? And you just don't know how those things are going to work out, right? So it's in nobody's interest to be in this destructive environment. We want to understand how to get out of that kind of, vicious cycle, if you will. So we want to look at the 2 basic communications models. One is the positional model. That's like, that's how I spent half of my career, right? In an adversarial situation. So a positional communications model is adversarial in nature. It's like, we warriors collide, we bump our heads together, and whoever is still standing at the end of the conflict is the winner. I'm concerned only with my outcome. And if I don't get 100% of my outcome, then I'm mad and angry. And I look at everything like it's a problem, right? Everything is a problem. Everything is an argument. It's power oriented. And there is a victor and there is a vanquished. That's the positional model. That's like going to trial, right? I spent a good 10 years of my life going to court in the adversary system. And I will tell you something about it. Stressful. It's stressful. It will raise your blood pressure. You know, it'll make you feel tense and anxious. And, you know, it's difficult. You know, it's difficult to every day, the clash of the titans, right? Well, I'm a different place in life, and I'm older and I'm wiser. And I realize once you end up in front of that judge, you're already about halfway lost, right? Because the judge, you don't know what a judge is going to do. I'm a judge, right? I'll just confess for any of you guys out there that are judges and you think I'm, you know, being irreverent. I also am a judge. I'm a Supreme Court justice for my tribe. And I will still tell you, if you end up before the judge, you've about halfway lost, because the judge is going to make a decision and there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser, right? That's the adversary system. Right now in my old age, now that I'm older and wiser, I want to resolve things. I want to work things out. You know, I want to try to understand, okay, what are your needs? What is your need? And I want you to understand, okay, this is where I'm coming from. I'm coming from this. I'm coming from this point of view. This is my point of view. This is the way I'm seeing the world, and this is why. Right? What does all of that require? Communications. It requires us to have good communications skills, to be able to talk, you know, so that I'm not going, oh, this is what I need, you idiot. You know, what's that going to do? Psh, escalator. It's going to escalate conflict. It's going to lead to a failed communication. But in an interest-based communication model, where we approach it in a conciliatory manner, right? I care about you, care about your needs, care about my needs. We got to work this out. This is where we want to get to. And if we can agree on anything, if we can agree, okay, we want this to be a civil discussion. Okay, you have an agreement, build on that. Build on whatever kind of mutual interest that you can identify and accept, because that's your start. So you find that common ground. Find that common ground. You're conciliatory. We're focusing not on what we want, but on the resolution of issues. Okay, so let's start by identifying the issues. What's at issue here? The 1, 2, 3, and 4. Write it down. Write down what the issues are, you know, and then focus on them one by one, looking at your interest and my interest. Okay, and where can those things come together? Where can we meet in the middle? Because there's always a place to meet in the middle. And then we start looking at options. Okay, well, we could do this or we could do that. You know, I mean, and actually it starts becoming kind of fun. You know, well, gee, I never thought of that. Well, what about this? And what about that? That's very different than what a stupid idea. What I think we should do is that. No, that's a stupid idea. I think we should do this. You know, you're actually in a way kind of doing the same thing. You know, you're looking at the options. What can we do optionally? But look how different it's framed, how differently it's framed. It's like now I'm looking at options in a constructive way, right? And I'm giving you, other side, that opportunity to like play that game, play that healthy game. Like let's think together. You know, compromise is not a bad word. You know, compromise is kind of where we want to get to. And we want mutual satisfaction. You know, I may not get 100% of what I wanted, right? But if I get 90%, that's still an A minus. An A minus is good. If I get 85%, that's a solid B. A solid B is a good thing, right? It doesn't have to be 100%. You know, for us to be happy and for us to feel like good about our ability to resolve this in a way that we both walk away feeling like we've accomplished something. We're accomplished. We're accomplished communicators. We're accomplished conflict managers. It's pretty exciting. Now, I don't know how many in this group work for tribal government, you know, and I do want to mention a few things about that before I, you know, kind of before I call it a day. But one of the things that I do, most of my practice, I serve tribal governments or tribal organizations or, you know, tribal entities, business entities. And so I'm very tribally focused in my life and in my practice of law. And one of the things that I stopped doing a long time ago, because I found that it was counterproductive, and that it was really one-sided and childish, was to constantly criticize my tribal government. You know, and I tried to flip that around. So I'm looking like not just about what goes wrong, because things go wrong in every institution, right? In every institution. You know, I've worked in Washington for the last 40 years. And, you know, and anytime somebody disses a tribal government to me, I go, look at these idiots on Capitol Hill, right? They can't do anything. They can't get anything done. All they can do is roll marbles out and try to, you know, mess each other up. Nobody cares about the people. You know, they're caring about their own power and getting elected again, you know. And I will say that when you contrast that to what's happening in our tribal communities, that's not how it is. I mean, we have our share of fights, don't get me wrong. We have our share of conflicts, but you know, everyone is genuinely working toward the common good, right? And we may, you know, we may not hit a home run every time, but I think that we have got to be better to our tribal leadership, you know, because a tribal leadership, they're elected, okay? They're elected officials, and they are constantly under political pressure by the electorate. And they are blamed for everything that goes wrong inside the tribe, right? That's, you know, and they get treated, our tribal leaders sometimes get treated in that very passive aggressive kind of style, you know, where they're really, you know, kind of being criticized unfairly or unjustly, and that we're not really thinking about what they have to accomplish and what their mission is and what a huge responsibility that they have. They are expected to do something about everything that goes wrong or is believed to have gone wrong inside our tribal communities. So, you know, like, suffice it to say, there's a lot of conflict. And a lot of it is because of people that are disrespectful and passive aggressive and finger pointing and not good communicators. If I'm dissatisfied, what is my role? What should I do? I need to communicate that to somebody who can do something about it in a professional manner, not in a childish manner, not in a demanding or entitled manner, but in a respectful, positive, effective communication, you know. And I think that we need to, you know, think hard about how we communicate this idea within our tribal communities, you know, how we, rather than kind of bully our way, how we start turning that around and persuading our way and being effective communicators when it comes to persuasion. So I think, you know, I've talked about half of my time now, maybe a little bit more, and everyone wanted, wanted me to give everyone a chance to ask any questions or have any kind of discussion. So Heather, why don't I kind of kick it back over to you?
Yeah. So I encourage people to keep putting comments, questions into either the chat or the Q&A function. There are a couple of things as you're speaking, Liz, that made me think a little bit. You talked a lot about how disrespect is the root of conflict in many cases, and it can really escalate a bad situation into a worse situation. But how do you deal with people who you feel like are disrespecting you when you're trying to maintain a cool head, but the responses you're getting in return are aggressive, they're demeaning, and even in some cases, really just straight up insulting to you? I think women in this field, and then adding this other, element of like Native women, there's lower women in the workforce, certainly lower Native women. And so sometimes, I know certainly when I was practicing as an attorney, just people were just straight up rude, So how do you deal with them, especially when you have to maintain a working relationship?
Well, what I typically do, and I've had many such experiences in my life where, it's like, people are just demeaning and insulting, right? And so my go-to response to this is to just be really candid and say, something, you will not speak to me in that manner. I don't deserve it, and you're not entitled to it. And until you can speak to me civilly, our conversation is ended. And I've done that at many different levels. I've done that in writing, where I had an attorney. We were on the opposite sides of a criminal case, and he became very rude and belligerent to me. And he misrepresented something I said to the court. So I sent him a letter and I said, I will no longer communicate with you, right? In verbally. I said, henceforth, all of our communication shall be in writing, and so I think, what I'm saying is you've got to draw your boundary, like, we don't want to be the passive aggressive person, right? That, just kind of goes like this and then stabs somebody in the back. If you're going to stab them like right in the head, right, like to their face, but be professional about it. I don't lose control. I don't start crying. I don't start screaming. I just start, I just stand there and go, you will not speak to me in that manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And such a good reminder that not all communications have to be face-to-face or even, orally, that using letters, writing an email, if they're really that outrageous, you can change to that mode of communication. That's
And that's actually a strategy, and it's one I have followed my whole life, a technique, if you will. And that is, I will come up with things. I will do role playing in my head, and I will come up, well, if this happens, then I would say this. If that happens, I would say this. That is not being silly. That is being proactive about, I know I'm going to face a conflict here. This could happen, that could happen, that could happen. If that happens, what do I do? If this happens, and actually over the years, I think that process is less conscious and more subconscious now, and I do have pithy little phrases. One of my favorite ones that I use like a lot is, no, that's not the way it's going to be. And like people will like, but you just say, no, that's not how it's going to be. And, somehow that works, and then I will, if they behave properly, then I will say, I think it could be this way, or I think it could be that way, but I don't think, this is how it's going to be. So what do you think? And then I also try to give people a face-saving way out, right? I have been told before that I'm a very intimidating person, and I don't really think of myself as that, but I do know that I'm a person that creates boundaries, and I think maybe sometimes I'm doing that subconsciously, just creating that boundary, but I don't want to corner someone so much that they're either afraid of me, want to run away from me, that doesn't have a path back so that we can stand together as two professionals and work it out. Because in the end, that's what we have to do. We have to get things done in this world. We got to make things happen. And we don't make things happen when we just completely break off communication.
Yeah. And I think that goes a little bit into also just like how helpful practice is when you're talking about the different forms of communication styles and trying to recognize the style that you use. I was definitely a much shyer, very reserved person before going to law school. And so it was hard for me to speak up and to be assertive. And at least for me, when you talk about practicing, thinking of different scenarios and what your response will be, that helps a lot.
Oh, right? Yeah. Have something at the tip of your tongue, very beneficial. It makes it a lot easier because you're not just caught flat-footed. I have been caught flat-footed. Oh my God, it's a horrible thing, and it's happened to me in my career. And, worse, it's happened because of judges yelling at me, right? And, and you must, retain your professionalism, or you could find yourself sitting in a jail cell, right? You can't just say anything to the judge. And, and so that was really good practice. I don't recommend it as a, kind of a scared straight kind of training program, but, it was very effective in myself and learning self-control, not the eye rolling, like keeping my body relaxed. All of those things also send messages to the other person that you're not someone to be trifled with. You're not engaging in those passive behaviors.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's a question in the Q&A where the individual says, during the conversation, I keep thinking about power moves by individuals who often have more experience or are more senior. This network is comprised by a variety of Indigenous women, both in entry roles and also more senior. What advice do you have for people who want to work on conflict resolution who are early in their careers and don't have as much confidence in demanding respect for themselves?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back to like my first tip, know yourself, right? And work on yourself. The fact of the matter is that if you're out in the world doing things, you're entitled to be respected. That's your right. You're entitled to it, and if it's a lack of confidence, then study your subject matter until you feel completely conversant in it, and then allow yourself to be proud of yourself. I don't know. So many women are kind of put in a situation where, kind of their spunkiness is kind of beat out of them, right? Or, there's some loud, rude person that's trying to undermine you or undermine your confidence. My view is, no, it's not happening to me. I'm not going to let that happen to me, not anymore. But I can feel that way because I feel good about myself. I feel accomplished. Like, I've accomplished something in my life. I have valuable information. I have a contribution to make, and so part of being assertive is to find that place by looking at yourself and developing yourself and knowing what being proud of yourself that allows you to stand up for yourself. And it's not something we're born with, something we develop, over the course of our career, and it can be taught, you can learn it. These kinds of discussions, they help us all get there and give us things to think about.
Yeah. That also reminds me a little bit about, and you talked about building relationships as well. I know at other kind of training specifically for women, they talk a lot about having a mentor who's going to share knowledge and guidance, but then it's also really important to have a sponsor, someone who's promoting your growth, providing you with opportunities for like professional advancements and success. And so I just wonder in this conflict resolution, if there's also not a role for having those types of partnerships, you know, someone, I guess the experience I'm thinking of is, again, early on in my career, I was at a mediation and the opposing party, at least our mediation, we're in separate rooms and then the mediator goes back and forth. The opposing party called my kind of like senior attorney, right? It was like, Heather's trying to do this or that, but that attorney would not talk to them. Said, Heather's the attorney there, you have to deal with her. And so that was like backing me up.
Right, right. You know, and I think that we all have a responsibility, you know, to other women, but don't count that other women are going to do that for you too. I remember when I first I was a baby lawyer, I was a baby prosecutor, and there's nothing scarier, right, than being a baby prosecutor. I mean, you're dealing with people's liberty interests, right? And you're in a courtroom and there's cops and lawyers and defendants and, you know, and I was in this courtroom and the judge was a woman. The judge, she was an Indian woman, she was Hispanic, right? And I started out, you know, I had learned this little saying, you know, which is, good morning, Your Honor, Elizabeth Homer for the state of New Mexico. Our docket is going to plead this morning, but it's going to take us about another 20 minutes to get the paperwork completed. So if you wanted to take a break, you know, have a recess for 20 minutes, we could get the paperwork completed, which I thought was what you're supposed to say, right? I thought that was what everyone says. Well, the judge flipped out and said, how dare you try to tell me how to manage my courtroom? I didn't really think that was telling you how to manage it. I thought that was giving you the information you need to manage your courtroom. I didn't say anything though. I was like this, right? I mean, oh my God, here she's screaming at me in a courtroom full of all these different people, the cops, the lawyers, the accused drunk drivers, and me, frozen. And this grizzled, then she jumps up, slams her gavel down and said, we'll be in recess for 20 minutes. Have that paperwork done when I get back. And she whirled it out of the courtroom. You know, and I'm still frozen. I still haven't moved, you know, because I definitely the deer. And this grizzled old police sergeant comes over and he bumps me with his shoulder and my shoulder. And he said something. I looked at him, I go, I beg your pardon. He goes, it's over there. And I said, what? And he said, that hunk of your, she just chewed off. And then the whole courtroom, including me, started laughing, right? Because it was a moment of levity, right? And it was funny when you think about it. And I had to be, you know, you have to be able to laugh at yourself, right? That's how you grow. It's like, be kind to yourself. Other people will be mean to you and they're good at it, right? Don't join that negative voice. Be your own champion. You know, you're going to be great. You're going to do good in life, you know, and just incorporate that inside of you and you'll be happy. You'll be effective and you'll be happy and you'll progress.
Well, that's such a great way to end. You know, believe in yourself. Knowledge takes all four different forms, right? Especially we've seen this growing recognition of indigenous knowledge and how that may be different from our kind of Western scientific notions. So you're capable, you can do it, and IWLN is here to root you. So thanks so much, Liz, for your time today. For those that joined us, we appreciate you tuning in. And stay tuned for future news from Talia about our events this fall and throughout the summer. Thanks again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much.